because after 18 years, probably 17 and a half of those years have just been outputting music. And it's important, I think, to let go and get a little bit of perspective sometimes. You know, record some dirt, why not?
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the Soundiron Podcast. I'm your host, Craig Peters, and today on the Soundiron Podcast, we talk with award-winning composer Jason Graves. Guaranteed, if you play video games, you've heard Jason's music, as he's composed music for games like Dead Space, The Order 1886, Until Dawn, Tomb Raider, Far Cry, and the upcoming video game Moss, which we discuss in the podcast. We also talk about his upcoming YouTube channel in the works, the challenges of composing for video games versus film, influences, and his new home studio, and he talks about his setup and how it allows him to work fast and much, much more, so stick around. Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate you, taking the time to talk with me today. And that's funny that the very first thing that you mentioned was your YouTube channel, and I saw you, do some posts a while back talking about the idea of doing a YouTube channel. How's that been coming along, and have you ever come up with a name for it yet?
It's coming along well. Honestly, the biggest hurdle has been the software, just to figure out, if you Google, good software for vlogging or good software for recording YouTube channels or something like that, you get about 80 different things. So I've been trying a bunch of different stuff out in my spare time, and I use those air quotes very strongly, so it's taken a little longer than I expected. But I've got, there's this software called OBS Studio, which seems really, really cool. I'm using that, and I can switch cameras and do a couple of other things. But I'm just using a webcam. It's so easy to compare yourself to a bunch of other things that are really professionally done with external cameras and multiple people, and it's just me in a room. Actually, this would probably be, since you're watching the video thing, this would pretty much be more or less what it is. I do have a name and plans for some different things, but I'm not going to reveal any of that yet, because I sort of want to do a little cat out of the bag all at once kind of thing. But I'm going to have either 3 or 4 episodes ready within the next couple of weeks, and just put them all up at the same time, so that it's, not a hurry up and wait kind of thing, like people sitting around after the 30-second intro video, is he ever going to release anything else?
That's awesome. Yeah, when I saw you announce it, I got pretty excited about it, because I was just, I'm a big fan of yours, and
I appreciate that.
The idea of composers who, have a really awesome career doing a lot of really cool things, sharing their knowledge with people like me who, even if, you're just a fan of the composer, just watching what they're doing, I think it's really cool, and that's awesome of you to do that.
Well, that's great to hear, because to be perfectly honest, the last couple of days I've felt extremely self-conscious, because I've never recorded myself. Voiceover things are one, and I'll maybe do an EQ or something, like a compressor when we finish this. That's fine. But video-wise, it's you see all your little ticks and all your everything else, and I'm trying not to make it a big deal, and I want to do something so that it's live, which is why OBS Studio works great, because you can switch things out on the fly. Less work for me on the back end, which means I can get more stuff out quicker, but it also means I've been doing all these tests and watching myself speak. I think no one enjoys watching themselves.
No.
So it's a bit of a...
I know. I totally, I feel your pain on that.
It's a bit of a letdown. But I so want to do that and get... you can see where I am. I've moved. I used to be in this amazing studio, but we're in a city. We've moved out to the country, so I'm in literally a spare bedroom. And that was sort of the impetus behind it, was I thought, everyone just assumes that if you've worked on a game that is considered a bigger game that a bunch of people have played, that you're in this amazing studio, and you drive all these fancy cars, and you live in a mansion, and most of us are just normal people. And I like the idea of the fact that I'm drilling holes in the wall to put PVC pipe so I can run cables to the drums next door. That's an everyday sort of thing. There's nothing fancy going on here, and if I can figure out how to wire my stuff, then surely I can explain it simply enough, I hope, to help everyone else figure out how to do it the same way.
Yeah, that's cool. So this is going to be your new studio?
This is my, you know, one of the names of the shows, an episode that I want to do is called the Temporarily Permanent Studio, because this is my temporary studio, but it's sort of my temporary long-term studio, because I want to build something big enough that I'm not going to outgrow, like, ever, which means pretty large. And I've got this really big piece of land. We've got about 28 acres here, so I have lots of choices, but I have to figure out where it's going to go and how big it's going to be and kind of what I want to build in future-proof-wise. And so far we have the site picked out, but it's going to be, I mean, it's going to be years before it gets finished. So I'm happily ensconced in this little room, this well configuration of rooms. I've got other rooms that I'm using as well. But yeah, it seems like spare bedroom with some panels on the wall. You know, I bet I know a couple of composers that can relate to that.
Yeah, I think that's probably most people nowadays can relate to that. I mean, I can. I mean, pretty much when I moved into this new apartment, the first thing that I did was like, okay, I got to set up the studio and figure out where you want to put all your acoustic panels and all that sort of thing. And even then I keep it pretty, you know, pretty downplayed, just enough to sort of kill the little extraneous reflections and stuff.
Exactly. And that's kind of more or less what I'm doing too. I think eventually I'm going to knock a wall down. You can't see, but this is like a 12 by 12 square room, but there's a wall where there's a closet over here that goes into where my drums are, and I'm going to knock that wall down and like put some hardwood down and do some proper acoustic treatment. And you know, when I have a month that I can stop working and take everything, and yeah, it's a daunting task. Moving in and of itself maybe a year and a half ago was about a month of tearing down and setting back up, and I'm kind of comfortable now, but everything needs to be rewired again. It's one of those things. We all deal with it, right?
Yeah, especially when you have everything set up. Like, I mean, most of the time people's cables behind, you know, their computer and all that, or if they have rack equipment, it's just usually you just plug it in, forget about it. Yep. And then when you have to actually deal with it, you're just pulling your hair out like, oh God.
Yeah, it was a pretty, I had a patch bay in the old studio. I mean, like 4 96-point single racks. So whatever 4 times 96 is, that's how many extra cables I had in the studio, because everything went into the patch bay. And that was a bit of a, whew, just trying to detangle that and figure out how to use like half of it, but not all of it. And I've changed the studio around a little bit now, and it's, yeah, first world problems and all that, but definitely when you have to do like 2 or 3 minutes of music a day, the studio needs to work like full time. And there's not a lot of time for playing around. You know, you kind of get it set up and you're afraid to touch anything.
Yeah, yeah. So other than that, I saw that you were working on the Moss game, right? You're working with Polyarc on that?
Yes.
Is that done?
It is.
Completely done?
The game came out 3 weeks ago, I think. It was like the 3rd week in March, I believe it came out. And I just saw PlayStation tweeted that it was the #1 VR game of March, which is pretty cool considering it had only been out for like a third of the month, I think.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. That was so much fun. And like I said, I'm doing a bunch of Moss-specific PR right now, but it's so great because on some of them I get to do it with the audio director, Stephen Hoddy, and he's such an amazing guy. I love hearing him talk about the way he implemented all the sound design. You know, he recorded a lot of that stuff himself, and sort of his idea of storybook audio in a forest as opposed to like National Geographic audio in a forest. And it's always great hearing someone else kind of give ideas of what your music means to them. And Steven knows the score probably better than I do now. But that was so much fun to work on and so different from anything that I've had a chance to do before. I think there's 3 tracks out. Polyarc has a SoundCloud page, and there's 3 tracks out sort of as a preview, and we are working on the soundtrack release as we speak.
Yeah, I actually got a chance to hear the 3 tracks, and they sounded really good.
Oh, sweet. I don't remember what tracks were on there. I know Maluka's song was on there, which is my favorite thing. There's some really great, fun combat tracks that don't sound anything like combat tracks. I don't think Maybe one of them was on the preview. I don't know. I should have done my own personal research to see what they were. But it was great because it's all this little teeny tiny mouse, and it's in VR, so you really get a sense that you, as a third person in the game, are life size, and this mouse is mouse size. You get a very strong sense of scale, how small she is. So it was a lot of fun playing lots of little tiny instruments and things to kind of relate her size and the scope of the game to the listener through the music. I could go on to autopilot for Moss because that's what I've been talking about lately. I'm just gonna be quiet and let you keep talking and asking questions and guide the conversation however you see fit.
No, it's all good. Yeah, whatever you want to talk about too. You primarily do a lot of video games, but you also do film and TV, right? So do you have anything film or TV wise that you've been working on too, or is it just mainly been the video games lately?
It's mostly been games lately. It's sort of like games are what I focus on. Games are what I go after. Like games are, my career is in doing music for games, but I don't really consider myself a game composer. And I know that probably seems contradictory a little bit, but I do compose for film and TV and commercials and trailers. I did TV and commercials and trailers a lot when I was in LA back in the day when I was first getting started. That was pretty much how I cut my teeth. And film, I do occasionally when I'm asked, and it's a project that will work out because inevitably it's a lower budget film, but it's with friends of mine or it's with something that has a really powerful message that I really connect with. And I enjoy working on the score just because it's kind of an outlet to write music a different way because it's so linear. I've done a couple of films in the last maybe 3 years, but it's not, I don't live in Los Angeles, so TV is sort of off the table. I mean, for big TV. I have lots of music that is licensed, that gets used in TV shows all the time, more of the reality TV and things like that. But for film, it's usually people that are out here on the East Coast where I am in North Carolina, and they're interested in working with me to come up with something original and fun, just like the game people do. And honestly, I write the music the same way in terms of emotion and connecting with the listener and all that great stuff. But it's a lot more simple because it's just you write a linear piece of music and it matches to the picture and the picture never changes. You can watch the scene again. The scene plays the exact same way. There's a lot less moving parts with film, so I do enjoy doing that. You can kind of exercise different muscles, where with games, the interactivity really comes into play, and it's almost like you're making a patchwork quilt, and you're making all the separate little squares, and then you're letting the game or the player via the game assemble those squares into, you know, different colors of quilts depending on their choices.
What do you find to be more challenging? I guess just depends, because you know sometimes a lot of people complain about when they're doing something for film and then they get all the, you know, a ton of edits sent back to them, and then they have to sort of like re-modify how everything is to the picture. Like, do you normally not have to deal with that too much, or have you ever had any cases where it was just a ton of work to fix?
For film, the biggest challenge, and this is again just for me personally, has been more the turnaround time than anything else, because I like to have the reels or the scenes that I'm working on be as close to finished as possible, and a lot of times everything kind of comes online at the end, and it's not in chronological order, and it'll end up being a lot of work compressed into a small amount of time, and usually not a huge budget. I mean, that's why I sort of say my career is in games. That's how I support my family. That's how I make a living. The bigger games have bigger budgets. And since I'm not working on bigger films, like a Marvel film or something like that, they naturally have smaller budgets. So it's more of a passion than it is, I'm going to make a living scoring film. And that makes it tricky because I'm juggling maybe a super low budget project that I'm having so much fun working on with a really big budget project that is also fun, but sometimes we'll ask for music at the exact same time. And scheduling for me can be or prioritizing and workload can be the biggest challenge. Because it literally is, it's just me by myself here in North Carolina. I don't have any assistants or interns. I don't farm any work out. Everything I do, like if cables are being made, I'm the one making the cables. If the patch bay is being rerouted and soldered, that's me. If it's pretty much, I'm the one-man studio. And it can get challenging sometimes if you have something for film, and then I'm still writing library music fairly actively for placement and just for general albums and things like that. I think it's important for any composer nowadays to have a lot of plates in the air spinning so that their eggs aren't in one basket. And most of the time that's good because you've got all these different things to dip your toes into, but sometimes they all stack up and deadlines can align in a way that, you just know you're not going to sleep for 5 days, and then hopefully you can sort of make it up on the back end.
Being that, I think that's awesome that you do so much by yourself. I remember seeing an interview where you were saying how you recorded, you mix, you master everything yourself. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of the studio setup that you have and some of the things that you do to sort of speed up your writing either in or out of the box?
Sure. It should probably be said that I don't do it all myself because I think I'm the best person for the job. It's sort of come out of necessity. I was only in LA for a couple of years, and when I was there, I didn't have the kind of work I had now. I didn't need anyone. I mean, I definitely needed someone to mix the stuff for me, but I could not afford to pay a mixer come mix my, really poorly produced reality TV score that I did last night. That's just not, it's not the kind of thing that would have been done. And the irony is, now that I am in the position where I could say, wow, I could really use some help getting this album mixed or mastering this soundtrack that's going to come out, and I could allocate money for it, there's just not anybody around here. And I do have a mixer that I love named Satoshi, who also does recording stuff for me now. He's got a fantastic ear, and I'll send stuff to him. He's in New York now. Other than that, and that's only been in the last 9 months I met him. So that one thing aside, I've always done it myself, and that includes, I never went to recording school. I got a degree in composition, and I went to USC in California. It was for film and TV at the time. There wasn't games. I think they have games added now, which is super cool. But even anything from orchestration to wiring and tip ring sleeve and impedance and all that stuff. I have an entire library in the closet of probably 70 or 80 books with little geeky post-it notes everywhere. And when I first got into my studio that I had built for myself in my old house in 2013, I realized how amazing anything could sound in a really well-treated room. So I started learning more about microphones and researching and buying them, figuring out the difference between like a ribbon or a tube, and learning a lot about recording techniques and things, again, mostly through books. I'm not big on YouTube only because I get frustrated trying to find the exact thing that I'm looking for, and a lot of times it's hard to separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out which 30-minute video should I spend the next 30 minutes watching, because I'm not really sure what their experience is versus mine, or if they're even going to talk about specifically the kind of thing I'm looking for. And books have always been kind of my friend. So that's the long-winded version of why I do all of this myself. I found with the game schedule especially, I need to do anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes of music a day for a game, and that's consistently. So if let's just say it's 3 minutes of music a day, that means I need to spit out 15 minutes of music a week, which means I'm doing 60 minutes a month, assuming 4 weeks in the month. And I work backwards from a schedule. Okay, if it's 3 hours long and I have 3 months to do it, then I know I need to do 2 minutes a day. And that's not messing with anything else. That's literally coming in the morning at 8:30 or 9, writing music, finishing at 5, and then going and doing something else. So the hardware that I do use is pretty much set up, and like left in place and locked so that all my mic preamps, I don't have to change any of the levels because my 22 microphones that I have set up are all going into specific preamps routed to specific inputs that have specific labels in Cubase. And I know if I want to use Bode Gong, for example, that I've got a 121 Royer ribbon mic on the gong, and all I have to do is go to my input list and find 121, and I know that that's the Royer. There's already a cloud lifter on it, so it's got extra gain. It's going into a ribbon mic preamp, and the levels are already set. I literally can just hit record, walk into the other room where all my percussion is, put my headphones on that are already in there and ready to go, and play. And I know the signal's gonna be good. I don't have to run back and forth and get test levels or anything like that. Same thing with my drum set. A lot of the stuff just, it doesn't move for me. So I found it easier to invest in more microphones and more stations for recording, especially since I'm a drummer, recording a lot of percussion or even guitar or anything like that. All the stations are set up and I never have to touch them. And the same thing can be said for my outboard synthesizers. I have specific inputs that are always labeled, they're always turned on, the presets are always saved as automation in the project. I've got way too many guitar pedals that I use for effects, both in stereo or in mono, and that's actually fun because half of them you can't automate them. You just have to go and twist knobs, and I love doing that as well. Some of my older synths are the same way, but a lot of the stereo ones are automatable via MIDI, so everything can pop up immediately and I can go from one project to another and everything kind of instantaneously comes back to the way it was when I left it, maybe the day before or the week before. Having that kind of recallability is essential to me, and most of the time when I'm delivering music, it's in stem format, either for interactivity or just for in-game mixing or simply lack of repetition. Maybe it's a 5 or 6 minute piece. Like for Stephen Hadi with Polyarc, it's a great example. A 6 minute piece, he gets all the individual instruments and he can make it interactive, but he can also do alternate mixes so that we're never really hearing the music loop. And that was very important for Moss because I don't know the percentage, but it's a very high percentage of music playing most of the time. Even when you die or it goes to another level or something's loading, the music's always playing. The sound effects are always going. So to spit out all those stems, I realized that a lot of the hardware that I had invested in, I had a Manley Massive Passive and an API 2500 and a Clariphonic EQ and another mastering thing that I'm blanking on at the moment. But that's all for stereo. And it sounds amazing and I loved it. But after 2.5 years, I hadn't used it once and it kind of broke my heart, but I just don't deliver in stereo anymore. The only time I would ever use it is if I was mastering a soundtrack. And by this time, I'm a huge UAD fan, and Universal Audio had the 2500 and the Massive Passive software versions, and I did blind tests, me and a friend of mine, and we couldn't tell the difference. And to use something for, 2 days out of the year, it just seemed that that stuff would have been better served at another studio where someone's going to use it a lot more. So I got rid of it.
Yeah.
I have no attachments to gear. If I'm not using it, I'd rather let someone else use it. So the gear that I have, while it does stay put and it doesn't get tweaked except patches and things like that, I trim all the fat really, really quickly. See, I told you that I can talk. It's probably been, what, 10 minutes?
No, that's good. Yeah, it's funny you say that because it seems like a lot of people are starting to sort of move away from hardware and getting into, because a lot of plugins are getting really good with how they're modeling hardware, as far as like mastering plugins, compressors, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's not really a surprise because it seems like a lot of people nowadays are sort of moving more and more into the box and getting away from spending $25,000 on a mastering compressor. And
I think if you're a mastering house, it totally makes sense. If you're a professional mixer, or if you go to Abbey Road or Skywalker Studios, of course you want to use the outboard that they have, because it's not just about the outboard. It's the cables going to the outboard and coming back. It's the impedance loads and how the audio works, and there's definitely some analog magic that happens.
yeah.
And I was blown away. I had 32 channels of API, like a summing mixer. It was 32 channels of API, and I couldn't believe how amazing, just recording drums or anything, just recording it through that mixer, it sounded like it had EQ and compression already put on it. It just made it sound a lot more musical, a lot more natural, a lot more expensive. It sounded legit. It sounded analog. And if I could have gotten 32 in and then 32 out so that I had discrete outputs on all 32 of those channels, I would have kept it. The problem was it was a summing mixer, and the whole idea was it ran stereo from those 32 channels into the rest of my gear. And if I wanted to record stereo drums, fantastic, but I just did something last week. They wanted all 12 mic channels, as well they should. So again, I don't have the 32 channels of API anymore, but what I learned about analog versus digital is just like film versus, you know, digital video you might take on your phone without a filter. Digital is 100% accurate and clean and truthful, and film has character. It saturates and it blurs it a little bit, and it does all these things that we're used to seeing as viewers of film. And the same thing can be said for music. Basically, analog stuff just makes it easier to have things sound good. That's been my experience. Same thing with microphones.
Yeah.
And recording things through a microphone as opposed to using a sample. Even if it was sampled beautifully at Abbey Road or something like that, the stuff that I do here just always seems to work better because I'm doing it custom for whatever it is that I'm playing. And it just sits in the mix better, it works better, and I had not really heard that in virtual form until I started using the universal audio stuff. And
Yeah,
I have Waves,
really
and I have Softtube, and I have a bunch of the other, I have all the software, but I think the UAD does a great job with their coding and their emulation and everything, but I think it's the processors, honestly, that make it sound so amazing. And I love the fact that I can stack up, I've got 3 8-core UAD cards, so I can stack up as many plugins as I want, and it's not taxing my CPU at all. It's going onto those cards, and I think the fact that that processing power is offloaded to the CPU is half the reason all their stuff sounds so amazing. My 2500 API compressor, one of the channels went out when I was mastering the Tomb Raider soundtrack back in 2013, and I called API and they're amazing, and they said, send it to us, we'll have it back to you within 24 hours. So I basically had 3 days that I didn't have my compressor, and I couldn't finish the tracks. But just as a temporary thing to sort of let me still work without printing the final stereo tracks, I pulled up the Waves 2500 compressor and matched all of my signal, you know, the routing and everything that I had, all the knobs and faders, and pulled the hardware unit out. And I love Waves, and it's amazing, but it didn't sound, it sounded great, but it didn't sound like my 2500. It just had it reacted differently, it had a different sound, it had a different color to it. It was just different. And before I sold my 2500, UAD had come out with their version of the 2500, and I did the same thing. And it actually sounded very, very close to what I had in hardware format. And again, I don't think that's because they have different ways of emulating or modeling these plugins. I think it's because UAD has all that processing power. And each plugin takes like as much processing power as it needs. And that's a big reason I think a lot of guys are going in the box now, like big mastering engineers or mixing engineers.
Yeah.
UAD is really enabling them to get a sound that the outboard boxes have that, and I'm not an engineer at all, I'm a drummer, man. I think if a drummer can hear the difference, the engineers can really hear the difference, you know?
Yeah, it seems like, also like what you were saying, the recallability, you know, and having everything in plugin form just makes things so much easier to change, and not, you know, having to worry about changing any settings on actual hardware. Is just being able to automate it and just total control of being able to just copy settings onto something else if you need to. It's just right there. And
multiple instances, right? I mean, Waves had something called Q-Clone. They still have it. I don't use it because I don't have an outboard EQ now, but I use the Q-Clone when I was shaping like a drum track, a kick drum, something with lots of transients and things, and I would run a mono signal through like the left channel of my massive passive, let's say. And I could use the Q clone and it would ping it, and once I turned it off, I couldn't tell the difference. So the Q clone basically did a snapshot of that static EQ position of the massive passive, and that sounded great. And I would do that for probably 8 or 10 different channels in a session. But now I just pull up the massive passive, and I can have 8 or 10 of them sitting there and dialing in, and it doesn't take me the extra 5 minutes per Q clone, which is a genius plugin if you only have one hardware EQ and you want to be able to duplicate it. But for me, since it was just the massive passive, it's like the world's best tube EQ in the world, but since it was a single massive passive sitting underneath my desk and then I could have 10 of them, it just seemed like a no-brainer.
Exactly. You mentioned Cubase. Is that pretty much what you're using nowadays for a lot of your composing, or?
It is mostly. I still use Digital Performer, and I also use Ableton Live and Pro Tools when I'm working with live stuff that's been recorded somewhere else. But if I'm composing, my main axe is definitely Cubase.
For any reasons in particular, or what do you find, just like sort of like the batch exporting or like MIDI functionality, or?
Originally, I looked into it. I met Lorne Balfe 5 years ago, maybe. We were together on an awards show, and he's the nicest guy in the world. It's like we're more or less the same age and lots of similar music interests and things like that. And every time I see him, he would just give me hell for not using Cubase. Like, why aren't you using, like it was this super obvious thing. And I saw him at Remote Control one time, and he sat down with me and showed me all the cool stuff that it did. And I'm like, well, I can do that in Digital Performer as well. But then he started showing me a lot of the navigation and the way things can be pulled up and hidden. And at the time, DP just couldn't do that. So I got it at the beginning of Far Cry Primal, which I think was maybe in 2015 or 2016. And I started using it then. And what I really appreciate about it is how it can handle really large groups of tracks. There's so many other things that I love, but that's probably the biggest thing that really wowed me at the beginning. So I can hit a button on my iPad and I can just see kind of whatever group of tracks I want. It could be like all of my strings from a certain library, or all of my live percussion tracks, or just the tracks that have information in them I've already recorded. It'll call the 3,000 plus tracks in the template down to 20, just with the push of a button. And that was a really big thing for me. I also it's German, and there's something about that German engineering and that German sort of logical way of processing things, especially the Project Logical Editor, which is a big thing that people are scared of in Cubase.
Yeah.
I've gotten super geeky with that, and I could select, let's say, a hi-hat pattern that's all 16th notes. I just tap a button and it'll automatically select and delete all the offbeat 16ths for me. I just built it in 5 minutes and saved it as a preset. You can really program it to do anything. It's very, very flexible and really, really snappy.
Yeah, I really like the logical editor. I found that, especially for doing stuff where if, let's say, you have everything at one velocity and you want to randomize it, you can set it up to where it's like, randomize the velocity between 120 and 127, and it just does it automatically, and then just kind of gets you there a little bit faster. It just seems, especially workflow wise.
There was definitely some things. I wrote orchestra music in Digital Performer for 20 years. And to say that it was ingrained in my brain and I knew it like the back of my hand is an understatement. So there was things that I would do, like if I wanted to grab all the brass MIDI information and turn the modulation data down or up. I knew the shortcuts to do it, and I couldn't figure out how to do it in Cubase, and I was so disappointed. And then I discovered the logical editor, and now it's like I can do what I did in Digital Performer, but I have so much more granular control over it. So I can choose just to increase it by 10%, increase it by 10 data points, delete it, copy it. And that's per controller. Like I can click on the MIDI data and it's got, let's say there's 7 controllers in there. I have different buttons on my iPad that select a specific controller, or increase it or decrease it, or even reassign it if it's come from another thing where they didn't have mod wheel for volume, as far as expression is concerned. Let's say it was on channel 11 and now I want it to be channel 1. I just hit a button and it goes, okay, I'll take CC11 and I'll switch it to CC1 for you, and it's just like that. I probably spend most of my time massaging MIDI data when it comes to virtual instruments. The composing and putting it in is easy. It's all about massaging the data, and I think it's probably cut my time or increased my time like twofold in Cubase, just because.
That's awesome.
Just tap those buttons and man, it's like a super time saver. And the batch export. You mentioned that at the beginning. That's a huge thing for me, because in my template I have kind of 3 sets of buses, and they start super wide, like each, I can export the violins, violas, cellos, and basses from each individual string library I'm using if I want to, all with the reverb and everything printed. Or I can just import like high and low strings from each individual library, or I can go and choose all the high strings, all the low strings, and any combination in between just by ticking a couple of boxes and hitting export, and it does it all usually faster than real time. And it's printing everything. And it even says on the box, like you rub your hands together and go, hee. It'll say exporting 78 channels at once. In a 3-minute queue, it takes like a minute and a half, and all of your stems are exported. That is a huge, huge deal. Now that's if I'm not using my my Bricasti reverbs, which if it does that, then it has to do them the traditional way, kind of one at a time. I need to just hit a button and walk away for a couple of hours so it has to solo each track if I want to print the reverb and that sort of stuff. But when it's all in the box, it probably saves me multiple days of work every month.
Yeah, that's really cool. What kind of reverbs do you find yourself using more and more nowadays? What was the one that you just mentioned?
So I got these Bricasti reverbs. They're hardware reverbs. When I was working on Far Cry Primal, because I was recording silly little things, hitting sticks together or dragging a brick on my brick floor outside the studio, and it had a very small, close, dry sound. And I kept trying different reverbs. I couldn't find anything that I liked. And I've always wanted to have a Bricasti ever since they came out. So I ordered 2, and immediately they sound like the best sounding, most expensive room you've been in. What really convinced me was when I was working on a job at Abbey Road in Studio 2, and I was there for the same job about 6 months apart. And the first time I was there, they had a Sony, some kind of modeling reverb that's like a 2-unit rack space, and I just pointed to it. I said, "What's that?" They said, "Oh, that's our impulse response of Studio 1. So if anyone is in here in Studio 2, which is the smaller one, and they want to have the sound of Studio 1, we just print that on a separate track. They can pull it up anytime." I said, "That's really cool." I came 6 months later, and there was a Bricasti sitting there. And I said, "What happened to the Studio 1 impulse responses? Did nobody want that?" And they go, "Oh, no, this sounds a lot better." And I was like, okay. And it's just literally the first preset, which is called like, Large Hall or something like that. And they had dialed it in just a little bit. But it's just an amazing, amazing reverb. It has 8 chips. It's basically a single UAD card in each Bricasti. And I've got 4 of them because they're all on different settings. But when I do that, if I have to do stems, it takes a really long time. So for example, for Moss, I knew it was going to be all stems. I did not use the Bricastis, and in that case, my second go-to reverb is the UAD Lexicon 240. It's the 240, isn't it? That's the closest I've ever heard anything come to the Bricastis in terms of sounding like it was just naturally part of the sound. It just really, really, really struck me how smooth and even it sounds. And I'm convinced it's because of those additional processors that UAD has on their cards. Another one that I really love is 2C Audio. I've got all of their reverbs, but the B2 is really great for fun kind of effects and things like that. I have an Eventide Space guitar pedal, which does amazing, like crazy out there modulating kinds of 30-second reverb kinds of sounds. And the B2 does that in the box. It's a processor hog, and it should be, because I think it's a dual engine algorithmic, some kind of reverb. But that's got a really nice sound to it as well.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, because I'm a really big fan of how you compose for strings, and I've always loved the way that you approach orchestration, especially for stuff like Dead Space, The Order. Like, I just love that stuff, all the string sections, amongst all you know, the crazy aleatoric stuff. One of my favorite tracks that you did was on Until Dawn. It's a song called Icicle Elegy. And it's probably one of my favorite tracks to listen to. And I'm just wondering if you have any tips or methods for writing multiple part string sections, or just how you go about orchestrating strings or brass. Is there any sort of way that you approach it?
That's really, really kind of you to say, and that's actually a great question, because I've sort of felt kind of like talking at the beginning where I was saying I'm feeling very self-conscious about doing these videos because I'm watching myself on the screen when I'm running these tests. For the longest time, I felt really, really self-conscious about my orchestration techniques and my ability to write for orchestra, because everyone that I was sort of coming up alongside in school, and even once I was out of school, other composers that I respected, that I was friends with, they were piano majors, or they played cello, or they did something that was a lot more musical than drums. Now, I am technically I'm a classically trained orchestral percussionist, so I do vibes and marimba and timpani, and I do all that stuff. But the bottom line is I'm a drummer. And I felt like I was at this incredible disadvantage, because even when I was in the orchestra, I was in the back of the room, you know, sitting, reading my book, waiting to go ting on the triangle, you know, 30 minutes into whatever the piece was. And I didn't have that kind of full body experience of immersion in the orchestra, and hearing like how the different sections were playing within each other and being in the middle of all of it. So I really studied hard out of school. I kind of got a jump start at USC for orchestration. I did not learn any orchestration as an undergrad. My professor was very 20th century oriented, which is great for what I ended up doing a lot of. I was able to just fall back onto stuff that he had taught me. But for real world orchestration, I was completely at a loss. So I really went back and studied like Holst and Tchaikovsky, and also John Williams with the Signature Series scores that he had, and just really geekily took all that apart, read all the orchestration books, tried to do the best I could, doing mock-ups of certain cues, even something as simple as, I mean, it's not simple, but taking like the first 90 seconds of Princess Leia's theme, and I had the signature score. So I would put that into the computer and both work on my kind of orchestration chops, studying it, but also my technical input chops on how to make it sound as close to the recording as I could. And then I would take that piece, put it in a different key, and write something based on what I learned, like right after that on the same timeline. I'd write my own piece and then kind of compare them and see how they sounded. So really a lot of what I've learned technically has been through classical studying of orchestration and reading books. But I also am a drummer, and I think that rhythm and meters, especially if you're talking about something like Dead Space, that just comes naturally to me because I played prog rock stuff in high school and college. I mean, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Yes, and Rush, and Genesis, and I'm into all the crazy time signatures and like displacing beats and crazy bass lines. I play bass and guitar. That's sort of like my heart comes from that sort of a thing. So when it comes to string writing, a lot of times if it's like an action cue, and I'll get to the icicle elegy bit in a minute, but if it's an action cue, what I don't want to do is have either drum loops, synthesized percussion, or live percussion driving the beat. I don't want to have like constant 16th notes pounding away on big drums or anything like that. I'm a lot more interested in having especially the strings take that over, because they can sit there and bow all day long and maybe do some trade-offs with woodwinds and brass, but I sort of picture the string section as a drum set. And if I'm doing especially action music, it's like the violins are the hi-hat, which is usually the busiest instrument on the drums, or the ride cymbal. You know, the hi-hat's kind of keeping time and doing the and then the violas are really more like the snare drum. They're kind of doing accents here and there, but they're not playing all the time. And then the cellos and basses are more like the kick drum, and they're sort of providing the like the groove is coming from them. So a lot of my action writing, I just fall back, and I didn't even realize I did this until someone said something like, I love the way you, like, I can tell you're a drummer when I listen to your string stuff. And it was sort of like wincing, like, really? But then they explained how they kind of hear drum rhythms, and it is really true. That's how I think of it a lot of the time.
That's really cool, actually.
And it's
I've never heard anyone approach it that way. It's really cool.
There's probably not a lot of drummers, you know, composing for string orchestra these days. But I realized probably 5 years ago, and it started changing. My mentality started changing with Dead Space, which was 10 years ago now. But I didn't have, there was no harmony or melody or chord progressions in Dead Space that I could fall back on, and there was so much combat music. Really, all I had was rhythm. So that was easy. I can do rhythm without a problem. And what seemed really straightforward to me, like, oh well, I'll just go 7/8/7/8 5/8/3/4, 7/8/7/8 5/8/4/4, 7/8, you know, and kind of vary the time signatures the way you would vary a chord progression. It all made sense to me, but other people just, they couldn't find the beat at all. And that was good, because I did offbeat kilter things like that to knock the player kind of off balance and make them feel like they couldn't figure out where the beat was. It made them feel even more uncomfortable, and then you put these horrible monsters in there, and it's like, it just completely takes you down. And that's what it was supposed to do. But that's when I started thinking, you know, it's good that I'm into rhythm and stuff like that, because I can do something like this kind of naturally. It just comes from a groove kind of rhythm background. But then I also love doing stuff like Icicle Elegy that was in the game. One of the guys, Jack Fiddler, I think his name was, they wanted to have him playing a fiddle, and you could hear it sort of different parts of the game, and it kind of went through a couple of instances, and I think that was on the first of 3 recording sessions I did for Until Dawn. But I'm sure that they asked for maybe a 30-second fiddle thing that sounded like something that would be from a classical or Baroque kind of piece. And in true Jason Graves fashion, I wrote that piece, which is probably 3 minutes long, with strings, accompaniment, and the violin goes all over the place. And I just had so much fun doing that, because it was so different from anything else. And then I got to record it with the string players, which was just amazing. I love doing stuff like that.
Do you have any client from hell stories? Anything that you've ever experienced coming up as a composer that was just a hellacious experience that you can talk about?
Right. As soon as you said it, my mind went straight back to when I was working in Los Angeles. The composer that I worked for is the one that wrote the Intel logo. Bum, 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 bum. And it was the Pentium 3, I think, when I was there, that we were working on. So it would go dum, 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 and it would have a little bling that said Pentium 3, like a little sparkle thing at the top. And Well, there was 10 people from Intel in Japan that came over, and it was very much decision by committee, which is the way a lot of work experience I had in LA went down, which is the main reason that I ended up leaving. And then fortunately, after about 5 years of doing other things, kind of fell into video games. We did something like 100 plus variations of this 4-note theme with a little sparkly sound at the end. And sometimes the 4 notes would be in octaves, sometimes they'd be harmonized, the sparkle would have different sounds. And it was just process of elimination. They came in every day for about 10 days just saying yes and no to things, and then we'd have to do combinations. And it wasn't writing music. And it's a half-second logo, and that's totally fine. I was happy to do it. But musically speaking, it was just soulless and draining. And you can only do so much with a little tiny piece of music like that, or even a 30-second commercial. I did so many commercials for ad agencies and things where you're speaking with the ad agency, and the ad agency is having you jump through all these hoops, and no, that doesn't work, let's start again, and they're changing direction, and completely new pieces of music every time, and the client's not heard a single thing. And then they finally feel like they've gotten to where they think is the best part of the music. They send it to the client, and the client says, I don't want this. This isn't what I was thinking. And it's back to the drawing board. I could never speak to the client. There was always this other human in the way. And that's what I love about film and about games, is I'm working with a director or I'm working with the audio director who is joined at the hip by either the creative director or even the producer of the game if it's a smaller company. And we're able to all sit in a room and talk and come up with ideas, and you're not spinning your wheels trying to guess what you think they might want because you can't speak with them. You know exactly what they want, and you've met in person, and it's just such a better, more satisfying kind of thing, musically speaking, to work on 10 or 20 minutes of music in a week and have it all be in the right place, knowing that it's going to go into the game the way that you wrote it, as opposed to working on 30 seconds of music for 6 weeks and having nothing to show for it. That was the killer that pretty much made me leave Los Angeles. I decided that I would rather write music on my own time, the kind of music I wanted to write, and not even get paid for it and go do a Joe job somewhere, than be a professional, quote-unquote, composer and do the same 30-second spot for 6 weeks. It just was not in my blood. I put my heart and soul into it, and it was killing me. So I got out.
Do you find that doing video games seems to be a lot more creatively freeing, as far as just being able to just sort of write more from your inspirations?
I do, but I do think I have a bit of a biased view now, because it's probably pretty easy to say that ever since 2008, so that's been more than half my career, 10 years ago, my general experience with new developers who are looking for a score is one of two things. Either, hey, we really loved fill-in-the-blank game, and we'd like a score that does that same thing in its own way, because we want it to be completely individual and unique and different, but we loved, you know, however you had that implemented or whatever, you know, there's an example of something that they like. Or they'll come to me like Tomb Raider or The Order or Moss, for example. There were no real preconceptions. It was basically like, hey, do you want to work on this? What do you think would be a great idea to do for the music? And by the way, we'd love something that's really original and unique. And usually the number one line is, you know, something that you can hear 5 seconds of and recognize it as our game, which is a really, really steep kind of thing to do right out of the gate. I've found usually if I'm, you know, 10 or 15 minutes into the score, then things are starting to sort of get honed in, and I'm dialing in that specific aesthetic for that project. But that's what they always want. They want something different and unique, and that is the opposite of my experience when I was in Los Angeles. But I was also doing reality TV mean, there was no, or ghostwriting for a film or doing commercials where there's no creative expression in commercials. It's about, this is the temp track and we want you to make it sound like this. So it is, I think, in general, more creative. I think in part because it's so much more of a community in games. It takes so many people all putting together equal parts of energy to make this cohesive project work and gel. Whereas with film or TV or commercials, it's usually about the director, you know, or the creative director or the producer if it's a commercial. And it's a singular vision that's sort of being passed down the totem pole. Where with games, I feel like it's a lot more collaborative, especially with many of the smaller studios. It's definitely a lot more collaborative. You can feel it. I mean, it's a different kind of energy. Everyone's looking out for everybody else. Everyone's doing this because they want to make the best possible game that they can, and there's no ego involved.
Yeah, that just seems like basically the perfect combination for coming out with the best product. Is just everything's cool, everyone's cool with each other, and just not having someone sort of dictate a specific vision musically, which I think can hinder you, you know. But I think people who are maybe directors who aren't musicians, they don't really know how to communicate. They just sort of have an idea and they're just like, okay, here, do this, and not knowing that that can kind of put a damper on your creativity.
And I understand that a lot of it is trust. And it's hard to trust someone you've never met before and someone that you've really only listened to maybe a demo or something like that. And that's where, especially I mentioned Dead Space 10 years ago, I've got, fortunately, this catalog of projects that they said, we want something super unique, and they let me do that. And other people I know have said, like between Dead Space or Tomb Raider or Far Cry Primal or Moss, those are all super, super different things. We know that you can do something really unique, and we know that you can deliver quality and you can do it on time and all the normal business stuff that's important. And that's something that you just can't convince people about just by talking about it. You can't say like, I'm a really good composer and I can work really hard under pressure and people have to be able to see it. And it has to be demonstrated through projects, and that just comes through experience and time. For me, it comes from 18 years of working primarily in games and kind of going after those sort of projects because that's what makes me happy. And it's a up-road struggle no matter where you are on the experience level. I think the best composers, artists, anyone creative are constantly challenging themselves and trying to do something new. So a new project is both liberating and exciting because they'll let you do anything, but also utterly terrifying because you're pretty much convinced that this is the project that you're going to fall flat on your face and fail miserably.
Yeah.
Jerry Goldsmith said that in a documentary.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think as far as composers go, you're one of the composers I think who think outside of the box, and you know, as far as instrumentation goes, and I'm sure you've heard this brought up a lot, but the whole like putting chicken fencing on top of a trash can and bowing it. I remember when I saw that for the first time, it just blew my mind. I was just like, damn. Like, to me, I think that sounds cool. To other people, I think they'd rather blow their brains out than have to hear something like that. But like, I hear like in the context of how it's used, how it's just, you know, super interesting. And what are some of your favorite recording techniques or crazy instruments that you've come up with over the years, or anything that you've been wanting to try that you haven't tried out yet?
Oh, that's a really loaded question, isn't it? Well,
sorry.
Totally fine. The chicken wire on top of the trash can lid was definitely a eureka moment because I didn't bring both of those into the studio together with the intent of using them at the same time. I brought the trash can lid because I figured I could bang on it. I brought the chicken wire because I thought I could bang on that. And it wasn't until like well, duh, if I put the wire on top of the lid, then you get this cool metal resonating chamber. I think a lot of it comes from being a drummer and seeing rhythm and sound kind of anywhere. You know, the most simple example would be at a stoplight, banging on the steering wheel, tapping the steering wheel, and then tapping the part where the horn is and where the seat is, and everything makes a different sound. But also having my 20th century kind of background with my professor, we were putting triggers on cereal boxes and walking around the concert hall for a performance and like triggering MIDI with these cereal boxes, and it was called cereal music, spelled like the cereal that you eat, not cereal like 20th century cereal. Just lots of fun tongue-in-cheek stuff like that. So it's sort of ingrained in my brain now to try to do something as different as possible. And being able to record my primary instrument, which is basically the world, I've literally recorded my desk because it just sounded great at the time. I've got 4 or 5 containers of things that like protein powder and stuff has come in, and I'll play on those. It's kind of like all bets are off. So I'm constantly looking for, just give me an excuse to find something new to do. I think probably my favorite sound that I've done so far was in Far Cry Primal, because I had a 99-cent plastic bucket from Lowe's with literally dirt in it, and it was hooked up like with some expensive tube microphone on the bottom, pointed to the bottom of it, and then another expensive ribbon microphone on the top. And I just like saying that it's like the best sounding bucket of dirt the world has ever seen, because I could grind a tree stump in there and either twist it or kind of pound it or even push it sort of against the bottom of the bucket, and you got all this low end, but you also got this really smooth top end. And for Far Cry Primal, it was perfect. It was basically like 3 different sounds in one. That's the sort of thing I can say it's fun to do now, but like Jerry Goldsmith said, at the time when I was doing it, I was thinking, this is the dumbest thing I've ever tried. Is this even going to work? I don't know. But I have to give myself a chance and basically say, today I'm recording dirt. There, I said it. I'm recording dirt today. And spend a couple of hours, like, you know, a little bit more gravel in there, a little bit less gravel. Is it the material of the bucket? And not pressure myself to actually do 2 minutes of music that day. This is my discovering how the best way to record dirt really sounds. And I have to make myself relax and say, like, it's okay. Because I'm very project driven, and if I haven't written 2 or 3 minutes of music in a day, I somehow feel slightly incomplete, because after 18 years, probably 17 and a half of those years have just been outputting music. And it's important, I think, to let go and get a little bit of perspective sometimes. You know, record some dirt, why not?
And that's cool, because it's like there's no books that can tell you how to record dirt. So it's like, you know, I think that kind of makes the process a lot more fun, because you're just trying, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just gonna, you know, put a bunch of stuff in front of me, you know, rocks and Aztec death whistles and bushes, and just make something cool happen, you know. And you did. I was actually listening to that score a few days ago, and it's just such a cool, like, it has that very earthy primal vibe to it, and it's just fun to listen to.
It's funny because I really appreciate you saying that, and I pulled it up maybe a month ago. I came across it, and when you're in the middle of it, you just don't, you always grow tired of whatever it is you're working on. If it was Dead Space, it wasn't scary enough. Whatever I was working on, it needed to be scarier, it needed to be more intense, just because I was so beaten down by it that it had no effect on me anymore. And Far Cry was the same way. It was like this, you know, there's no real keys, there was rhythm and lots of screaming thanks to Maluka, and I got to do lots of fun stuff with the death whistles and you know, playing kinds of funny things and pitching them down and putting extra reverb on them and stuff. But I didn't really have that outside listener experience, and I listened to it maybe a month ago, and it was like, what was this guy smoking? Like, there was stuff going all over the soundscape, and like, and these huge drums would come in, and it was like so dynamic, and I kind of felt like, okay, me 2 years ago was doing what I hoped that I would have been able to do, but I didn't feel like I was doing it 2 years ago because I was in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, how did I get that, you know, that big, low, punchy sound? And what's with the, boy, I wish that I could have remembered half of what I had worked on. I do remember how I recorded the dirt and some of the some of the other things as well. But I think that's the blessing and the curse of working so much is there's so much that I end up forgetting, but then I'm kind of able to come with a blank slate later and listen to it. There was a guy that worked with me for 6 years named Dan Schneider, and I just had dinner with him last night. He lives in town, and we see each other occasionally. And I told him my favorite thing that he had ever said when he was working with me, and I was reminded of this when you were just talking about, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'm just going to figure out how to bang on some of these things. And I was in the middle of one of my discovery crises, trying to figure out how to make something sound somehow the way I was hearing it in my head. And he came by and, you know, knocked on the door. He's like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, awful. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just like making this up as I go along. And I don't know, man. He goes, you know, there's a word for that. It's called composing. And I was like, oh.
Yeah, welcome to the life of a composer.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're making it up as you go along. And I think I'm very much, I appreciate that more now. And I know that if I'm working on something new and I'm not half terrified, half excited, then I'm probably not pushing the boundary enough. I don't think I have gotten to the point, and I always say this to developers at the beginning, is my job is to go so far out beyond what you guys are expecting the score to be in a unique individual way that you're going to pull me back and go, okay, Jason, that's enough. We don't need to go that far, you know. Pull it back 20% and then we're good to go. And no one's ever said that.
Yeah.
No one's ever said that. So I rely on them a lot for kind of that outside perspective, forest for the trees, because when I'm in the middle of it, I just never have it.
That's really cool. I want to talk a bit about, because I know, you know, that you're a drummer and you would probably consider yourself, you know, a drummer at first. Who are some of your biggest influences drum-wise?
Oh, geez. So I have like two sets of influences. One of them would be the guys that I just have seen play or watch play and think, that's amazing. I wish someday that I could be like that, but I know I never will. And that's guys, more jazz guys, like Buddy Rich or Gene Krupa, just the really, really technical Dave Weckl, the guys that are even playing still today, like Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, just really, really amazing. But then you've got kind of the rock guys, and I love them because while I will never play like John Bonham, I can, and I did all through high school and college, play 2 Led Zeppelin songs and pretend like I'm John Bonham. So Phil Collins, especially when I was first learning drums, I played a lot of Phil Collins songs. My teacher had a Phil Collins, like drums by Phil Collins, and he's always been such a tasty player. But that opened it up to Yes and Rush, of course. Neil Peart was just absolutely amazing. And I played all that stuff and just soaked it in and could play pretty much. Being the geek that I was, I would only play songs that I could get the drum music for, because if I played a fill wrong and it wasn't like what I heard in the headphones, it would bother me. And I didn't want to sit down and transcribe the whole thing, so I've got probably 20 books of transcribed drum songs. Foo Fighters, too. Taylor Hawkins is just, what an amazing sound. And in that same breath, of course, you have to mention Dave Grohl, because they're both just such... Yeah. They're like the John Bonhams of today. I mean, they just hit so hard. It sounds like compressed and everything just when they sit behind the kit. And I'll play some Foo Fighters songs, and after one song, I mean, I'm just wiped. It's no wonder that Taylor's skinny as a rail, do a 2-hour show and do that for 6 months. I mean, their stuff is just really fast. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I'll sit down and play just for kicks even now. Or as a part of my exercise. It's great, because drumming is really good full-body exercise. You're literally moving
Oh, yeah.
everything. And I'm more wiped out after that than I am if I ever had, gone to the gym or played racquetball or done any of that other stuff.
Yeah, drums are definitely an instrument that if you don't keep up on it, you won't be able to play. Like I used to get into drums and I was trying to learn for a while after my first band broke up. I was like, I'm going to try and learn to be a drummer and start trying to play. And I was trying to get into doing like fast double bass. And I was just like,
oh my gosh,
nah, I'm just going to stay with guitar. I was just like, this is like a whole nother level of dedication that I don't know if I want to do. So then I got into programming. I discovered that and I was just like, oh, I could just program it. I don't need a drummer now. So
there you go.
Until you really need to play it live.
Right. Yeah, that's something that I did a film maybe 4 years ago now that was called Adrenaline. And they had a band already lined up that had recorded like a music video for it, and they were going to use that song in the end credits. And it was about street racing, or street racing, but also professional like drag racing on tracks and things. And I love the idea of writing a score that basically sounded like that end credits song. Like, what if you hired that band to do your film score? And what I loved was it ticked all my boxes of. It was something different that, most film scores are not like done by a rock band. So check number one. Number two, I hadn't done anything like that, and that's always exciting to me to do something new. And then number three, it gave me excuses to spend money on gear. So like the stars all aligned, and I had wanted to buy a new drum set for the longest time. I only had my old Slingerland kit from college, and I wanted to get a proper rock kit. So that was my excuse to buy the drum set that I have now, which is just this gorgeous Mapex maple, tons of toms and cymbals everywhere, and I got all the microphones I needed, and I was able to buy some more guitars and some amps and everything, and just kind of really geek out and record that score 100% live, no plugins or anything like that. And like kind of woodshed. I'm not a lead guitar player at all. I can do rhythm. And I discovered that being a drummer, like once I knew the shapes with my left hand, like my right hand was there. It was in the pocket. I didn't have to practice that. It was just fingering the chords with my left hand. So that was a lot of fun. And I still, any chance I get to pull out the guitars or the basses, I'll do it in a heartbeat. And the drums are in the other room, just set up all the time with all the mics ready to go. And it just, nothing sounds like live drums. I've got all the drum plugins and they all sound great, but I think being a drummer, I want to hear, the difference between like playing kind of loud and playing really loud, just the way the drums respond and the way the air in the room responds to the preamps and all that stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun, especially having a drum set set up. It's like, why would you even need to, that'd be like me probably programming guitar. It's just like,
exactly.
No, I'd just rather grab my guitar and play it.
Yeah.
Over the, your whole career, are there any things that you've done wrong in the past that you think that you've learned from that made you a better composer today?
Wow.
Or any things that you've done that that really sort of changed your outlook on how you see either the business or just how you write? Or
That's a really good question. Let me take a sip of tea and think about that.
Ponder over tea.
Yeah, that is a good question. I wish that I had a story that was like, I did this thing and I thought it was right, and it turns out I totally messed up. I'll answer your question in a slightly different way, because I do have kind of an illustration that I think made me kind of who I am today, and the composer that I am, and especially gave me the kind of work method that I have today. And that was when I was in Los Angeles, still in school even, and I can't believe that they gave me a diploma for graduating, because as soon as I got this job about 2 months in, assistant writing for this composer, I never went back to class except for the recording sessions. And I was working all the time, and it was literally like I'd be doing this, reality TV show or a second pass on a commercial, or my boss was ghostwriting on a film, so I was also ghostwriting for him, and there'd be a courier outside, because this is the mid-90s, there was no technology to do things on the internet. There's a courier outside just standing there waiting to take the 3/4-inch tape to the mixing room and dub it and like put it on television or go to the ad agency or whatever it was, because it was going to air the next day. And that sort of pressure taught me to, whether I wanted to or not, work really, really quickly. And it got to the point, my first TV show, I think I had something like, 7 rounds of corrections back and forth with the 3 executive producers that were on it. And it took me 4 days to get all the music finally approved and sent off. And by the time I had left Los Angeles, I was at the point of no corrections for the producers, and I could do an entire show in a single sitting, which was it was a 42-minute show, so it was usually about 40 minutes of music, because all this stuff was just wall-to-wall music. So I could do 35 to 40 minutes of, stupid underscore for these reality TV things, but I could knock it all out in a day. Not because I was trying to beat a record or anything, but because I knew it had to get done, and I learned really quickly to satisfy the deadline before I satisfied my kind of internal creative voice. Because if you listen to your internal voice, you'll never finish anything. There's always something extra you can do, and oh, well, what if I just try this? And I'm so deadline driven that it comes down to literally the way I said at the beginning, if it's 3 hours of music and I have 3 months, I work backwards and say that's 2 minutes a day. Even within that 2 minutes a day, I split my day in half. I need to have my first minute finished before noon, which means if I start at 8 a.m., the first 15 seconds need to be finished by 9, and by the time 11 a.m. rolls around, I better have 45 seconds finished. And I work very much in a horizontal manner like that. Everything gets finished, the first 15 seconds, all polished, and then move on. And I'm able to work backwards even within my day, where I'll say to my wife, I'll be downstairs at 5 o'clock, and at 4:59, I'm hitting shut down on the computer, and everything's been exported and uploaded. And I think it's just through, it's like making a diamond. Only through sheer pressure and time can something like that come into being. But it really did shape the way I thought about music, and I've never really had any emotional attachments to things, because I never had the chance to write music for myself. My wife would introduce herself to some friends back in the day, like when we were just married, and they say, "Oh, your husband's a composer. That's so great. I bet he's written you so many sweet songs." And she's like, "He's never written me a single thing." Because I was still in school when I started writing, and it was for someone else. So if I had to write something by myself, I wouldn't even know where to start. That's something where I envy other people that maybe they don't have a job and they're trying to figure out, how do I woodshed, how do I get used to writing music, and all I can say is write music every day, because that's what I've always done. Of course, I also read that that's what John Williams does. I mean, years and years and years ago, he said the 3 things that he does every day is he writes music, he reads, and he walks. He goes on walks. And that sort of stuck with me, because it is, as you know, being a musician and a composer, it's very much like a muscle, and the more you do it, the more you realize, just like cooking, you've never cooked before, and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing, I don't even know what to do to this chicken, and you fast forward 5 years where maybe you've studied cooking and watched all these classes and have all these cookbooks, and you're looking at the same piece of chicken 5 years later thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to decide how to fix this chicken? There are so many different ways to do it. It's more of a process of elimination as opposed to, I have no ideas. And that just comes from experience.
Yeah. Is that pretty much how you approach crunch time when you say, okay, I got 8 hours today, I need to make 2 minutes of music? How do you deal with any writer's block, mental interruptions where you're just like, oh, where do I want to take this? Or or does it just kind of, once you get into that gear, it just sort of flows?
It's... Writers,
that's one of the things that always fascinates me. And
I'm always curious to hear other people talk about it too. I've never really had writer's block. And I don't want to say that as some like elitist, amazing Mozart who just like spins things out of his head and puts them down without any effort. There's always effort, but I think because I've always been so deadline driven, there's never really been like, you know, do I feel creative today? Not that people with writer's block get up in the morning and think about that. But I haven't had the option, because it's just kind of get up and go. And probably the first 10 years I was working in games, I know I spent a lot of time listening to film scores. I love watching film. And I used to collect, back when you bought CDs, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of film scores. And I would listen to those kind of for inspiration. So if I worked during the day and I was working on a World War II game, then in the evening I was listening to maybe like 1942 by John, or 41 I guess it was, by John Williams, or some of the classic old like Jerry Goldsmith kind of things, just to look for inspiration. And I kind of had a plan going in the next morning. Eventually, I think I just got kind of brain dead and I needed a bit of a break in the evening, so I stopped listening to other people's music and realized that even though I wasn't sitting with my headphones on for 30 minutes the night before I went to sleep, listening to 1941, when I woke up in the morning, I still had a lot of ideas of what to do, and maybe I trained my brain to do that, I'm not sure, but it gets to the point now where, again, with that schedule, like I know today I'm working on this project, and then tomorrow I have to work on this other project, and then Friday I need to make sure that I get that third project finished. So the night before and the morning of that day, I've pretty much already figured out what I need to do. And I used to play games and kind of figure out if I could figure out what key that I was hearing it in my head, or get the chord progressions down the correct way, or it just comes down to sitting down in the morning and inputting and then massaging. And I think that's maybe why it's not, for me now at least, the last 5 or 6 years, it's not a matter of a creative block or not thinking of something to do. It's just more like that 5-year later chicken analogy, which hopefully I won't bring up again. Like, oh my gosh, I have so many different things. What is it that I'm going to do? And I've usually decided that the night before or the morning of. And by the time I get to the studio, which is in my house, it's just a matter of, you know, kind of pen to paper, so to speak, and making it sound as good as I can before that 5 o'clock deadline. Because I know when there's a super crunch and I have to work in the evening as well, I'm going to start suffering about 3 days in. I can't perform as efficiently if I'm working more than like 8 to 5. And sometimes I have to do it because there's just too much music that needs to get done. But I promise you, I will be in a terrible mood the entire time I'm doing it, and I will think that everything I'm doing is horrible, because I don't have that perspective of kind of getting away and like cleansing the palette.
Being that you've been so gung-ho and just sort of running with writing music, if there is something else that you could do for a living, or like a second choice, what would that be? I know that's hard to ask for musicians, because it's like, oh, well, I love music, I'd always want to do music, but sometimes I always wonder, you know, people who are so focused on music or their job and been doing it for so long, if, you know, if you could do another job or something, what would it be?
That's tough. So, I mean, the same kind of question would be like, well, if you had all the money in the world and you didn't have to make a living, I mean, the obvious questions that you ask people, that I ask people, you know, or you want to be a musician, well, if you had $1 bajillion dollars, you know, what would you do? They'd be like, I would have gear and I would be writing music, and that's always the proper answer. But for me, I'm actually a huge animal nut. I mean, we have all kinds of animals here on the property, and it's not the main reason that we moved from the city downtown, but it was definitely high on the list of good things that could happen if we moved out here where all the woods are. So I would probably have some sort of a job as like an animal conservatory, or a place where I know if my wife was involved, we'd have like a shelter for dogs and cats. But we also have
really cool.
We have parrots, I mean, and all kinds of other birds, and porcupines and tortoises, and there's a bunny hopping around my feet as we speak. So it would probably be some sort of, animal habitat / conservatory zoo kind of thing, because that would be a lot of fun.
That's really cool.
That's kind of my second passion, which I guess is the question you were asking.
Yeah, well, that's cool because you're kind of doing both, right? You're sort of doing both at the same time.
We are. It's like I'm sort of living vicariously through the animals in the morning, and then at the end of the day. Because what I love about them is they don't care about deadlines. They don't care if well, for example, if Rufus, the bunny's name is Rufus, if he accidentally chewed on one of the cords and now my right floor tom is no longer functioning because my 50-foot cable got chewed, he doesn't care about that. He just thought it was something that was good to eat. It's like a really nice perspective. They're all so happy when you go out and see them, and they're kind of interacting and doing their own thing. We've got 2 different aviaries with all the parrots, and then a big fenced-in area where there's like a turkey and ducks and geese and chickens and things like that. And it's outdoors, and it's like the exact opposite of everything that's around me right now. All the technology and computers and recording equipment. It's about as far away as I can get from that, and then some, because the animals are just entertaining in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I saw it running behind you when you were talking. I saw it kind of like scurry behind you. Like...
I might open the door just to make sure that. So bunnies are really interesting. This is the second one we've had, but you can litter box train them just like cats.
Oh, really?
So that's why he stays in the house. He stays upstairs in kind of my quadrant of rooms that are the studio, but his litter box is in the other room, and I only close the door if I'm doing a recording or something like that. And, just like a cat, you want to make sure they can access their litter box.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know rabbits can do that.
They're very, very smart, especially the bigger ones. The smaller ones, like the really small ones, a lot of times are more scared than anything else, just because they're so prey-driven, being afraid that they're going to get picked up and eaten because of their size. But the bigger ones, like Flemish giants, which Rufus is half Flemish giant and half lop. So he's kind of a big rabbit, and he's got these loppy ears. He's super cute. I put pictures of him up on like Twitter and stuff every now and then. But the bigger ones, they act more like cats. And our cats will get up here and play with him and wrestle with him and do all this stuff. He's super nosy and follows you around everywhere. And yeah, it's great. He's the perfect studio companion because he's also dead quiet.
That's cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Of all the things you've done, what would you say is your greatest creative ambition, either personally or professionally?
That's such an unfair question. Okay, well, all right. So 2 things come to mind immediately, and I'll just do a quick version of both of those. The first one that I think of, and they're both with music, was the score for The Order 1886. And I think that one still registers with me personally because, number one, Sony's amazing. And they literally said, "What do you want to do with this score?" And I told them. And, I said, I want to not use any violins, and I want to do all these crazy orchestrations, and I want to have 3 contrabass clarinets and 3 contrabassoons, and I want to go to Abbey Road and record in the small room, not the big room, because we want to get this certain sound. And I had this whole laundry list of things, and they just said, okay. So I got to spend between 2 different sessions, basically a week at Abbey Road, and was just really, really, I couldn't believe how amazing it sounded. That's the first time I had done a truly 100% live score that I didn't have to take back home and mix myself, or augment with all my percussion sounds, or take my orchestra samples and put it on top of, or part of it was live and 2/3 of the score was all my orchestra samples via MIDI. It was all done like completely legit, and I just loved the way it turned out. Everything from the choir with 24 voices to the 20 violas and crazy strings. So that was the first one. But honestly, the second thing that popped in right behind that is this score to Moss. And that's not really because of any technical achievements. I love the fact that I could play my ukulele on something finally. That was great. And I love being able to play hammered dulcimer too. I bought one when we were in the mountains of North Carolina probably 4 years ago, hoping I would be able to use it on something. And I was able to use it on this. It's more the style of the music for Moss, which is kind of the music that if I did have no job writing music for other people and I was writing music just for myself, that's the kind of music that I would write. Very melodic and relaxing and kind of soothing, which is the opposite of, you know, The Order or Dead Space or Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
It's the kind of stuff I really, really love doing. It's just not what I'm asked to do a lot, and that's totally fine. I'm happy to go rub rocks together and get paid for it. Don't get me wrong. It's a different kind of satisfaction, right? It's more of a technical, creative satisfaction where just listening to some of these soloists play these songs in Moss just gets me goosebumps. And it's nice because it's really the polar opposite of The Order. It was all done here in my studio. 2 soloists in Florida and Los Angeles recorded their parts completely dry, just in a spare room like this. And I mixed and recorded everything else here. And the end result, I mean, I would like to think holds up quality-wise, because it's soloists and small ensembles, holds up with something like The Order in terms of kind of authenticity and emotional power. It's just a different way that it's done. And I love that with technology, that I can write a piece and have it finished at 3 in the afternoon and text Kristen, my woodwind player in Florida, and like an hour later, she's got the flute and oboe parts finished, and I'm putting them into the computer, and wow, that was easy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so easy nowadays with, you know, the internet and how fast files can travel and stuff not being on tape anymore. It's like texting. It's so easy to get a hold of somebody.
I know, I love it. Gone are the days of the courier standing outside my door impatiently waiting me for, because you had to stripe the tape first with time code, and if it's a 40-minute show, that means you have to spend 40 minutes striping the tape, then you have to back it up and lay down the audio. So it's just, oh, it was too much pressure. It's a lot easier just to hit upload, that's for sure.
Well, Jason, I want to really thank you for taking the time to talk and hang out. It's really cool to talk to you, and definitely looking forward to hearing the rest of the score for Moss. Just the 3 tracks I heard were really cool. So I'm, you know, the fact that you're so happy with how it came out and you had a lot of fun working on it, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing it all in its entirety.
Oh, that's great. I'd love to hear what you think. It's definitely something. I mean, like I said, something that the kind of music I love being able to do, but also even the combat music is lighthearted and more fast-paced than, you know, traditional kind of game combat music. There's no giant drums and blaring horns. It's all like oboe and flute concertos almost.
Looking forward to everything else that you come out with. You know, big fan of yours, and
thank you.
Just saw the rabbit again.
Oh yeah, he's around, that's for sure. He'll start jumping up and putting his feet on my legs soon because he wants me to pay attention to him.
Yeah, just place him on the keyboard and just put some instrument on and just let him write something. Just...
He'll go blink blonk, blink blonk, blink blonk as he hops around.
That's the next score.
Yeah, it is.
Well, yeah, I just want to thank you again. You know, thank you again for taking the time, and
oh,
you know,
totally my
cool
pleasure.
Talking to you, and
thanks for all the great questions. I think the ones that make me pause and say that's a really good question. That means that's a really good question.
Oh well, thank you. That's what I want to do. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into the podcast. As always, if you guys like what we're doing, make sure to find us on iTunes, or you can go to the Apple Podcast to find us on there. Also SoundCloud, YouTube. And if you like what we're doing, please share, tell a friend, subscribe to us. And if you find us on iTunes, please leave us a rating. Let us know what you guys think, as we're going to continue to keep bringing on great guests for you guys. And if you want to learn more about Jason Graves, you can head over to his website at jasongraves.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.